Hello and welcome to the new Ribbon Rouge Foundation podcast. My name is Adeyemo, and I'll be having special conversations with the movers and shakers behind the growth and sudden explosion of the Ribbon Rouge Foundation. Today, we have as our first guest, multidisciplinary artist Timiro Mohammed. Good afternoon, Timiro. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, T. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I've got a short bio, which I'm just going to read about you. Timiro Mohammed is a Somali-Canadian spoken word poet and multidisciplinary artist inspired by the generations of storytellers before her. She believes in the power of the spoken word as a means of activism, and she has shared words before the Canadian Senate, the Edmonton Public School Board, and both municipal and provincial governments. As part of the Breaking Ground Art Collective, she co-developed an interdisciplinary theater performance exploring Blackness on the prairies through poetry, Afro-Caribbean dance, and visual arts. She was a former City of Edmonton Youth Poet Laureate, the recipient of the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation's Top 30 Under 30, and she has competed nationally at the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word. Welcome again, Timiro. Thank you for joining our first Ribbon Rouge Foundation podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, so we did not really finish reading your bio there because there's a lot in it, and you're not just a multidisciplinary artist, you're also a very talented spoken word artist. I've seen you do your poetry, and I've seen you move crowds. So why poetry? Actually, before that, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What did I miss? What do you want our audience to know?
Yeah, I don't think you missed anything. I grew up here in Edmonton. My family is originally from Somalia. And I guess kind of to answer your second question about why poetry is something that is a very big part of the Somali culture. I come from an oral tradition, and so many of the women in my family, going back generations, are all poets in their own right. Yeah, and poetry is just a part of how we gather, how we tell stories. And so as someone who is a first generation Somali-Canadian growing up here, my medium of poetry just happens to be spoken word.
And you talked about the influence, your mother, your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me something from your childhood that stuck? How did you know you were going to go into this line of work when you were growing up?
I think I didn't know that I was ever going to pursue it as something that I would share publicly, but when I knew that I loved it and that I was really drawn to it, I remember my mom taking me to this poetry open mic night that Ahmed Nomadic had organized in the city. And I don't remember how old I was, but just seeing him sharing and other poets sharing, it was almost like letting me know what was possible. And I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing, but specifically witnessing that was like, okay, maybe I should explore this a little bit more. And that was kind of the beginning.
Absolutely. So did you have mentors along the way? Was
Yeah, absolutely.
ever a mentor?
Absolutely. Ahmed Nomadic, Nasna Adam, Nisha Patel, all of them paved the way. And without their support and their coaching and without them creating spaces for me to share, I would not have continued on the path of wanting to be a poet.
When someone describes you as a former youth poet laureate, that is such a big deal. And to meet you so very ordinarily like this, I feel immensely proud and honored. What did that mean to you?
Edmonton is a very interesting city because so much of the spoken word community and the poetry community is shaped by people from the African community, people of color in general. And so it was a space where I was not the first. Before me, there was Nasser, who is the youth poet laureate. Before me, there was Ahmed, who is the poet laureate. Currently, there's TC Lope, who's the poet laureate. So there are so many people who I was in the company of when I was getting the chance to do that opportunity that I felt like I could do it because there were people before me who I saw do it. And then honestly, it just created the platform and the space to not only share my poetry, but to have the access to the resources and the support to support other poets who are also interested in doing this, who come from our community as well. So it just felt like it gave me access to build community, to pay forward, and also just like to have access to safe spaces that were for us and by us.
When you talk about using poetry as a means of activism in the anti-racism space, could you tell us more of what that really what it looks like practically?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the civil rights movement, when we think about globally, the way that, especially in my community, people have mobilized, art has always been this very powerful catalyst that gives voice to communities and allows people to kind of rally around a common, I guess, call to action. So for me, poetry is a language that I can access when I don't know how else to express myself. And it's always been something that I've used to reflect what's happening in the world around me and the spaces around me. And so naturally, one of the things that I reflect and talk about is the many forms of oppression that we experience and live through as people of African descent living here in Alberta. And especially when I was the youth poet laureate, that was one of the first times where I was able to take that writing that I was doing, that was talking about what was happening in our community, and present it before a body that had the power to do something about it. So the first poem that I presented to City Council when I was youth poet laureate was actually discussing the incident that happened with a young boy by the name of Emel, who went to, I don't remember the name of the school, but it was a Catholic school in North Edmonton. He had been wearing a do-rag in class, and he was, I believe, kicked out of the class, and then school resources officers were involved, and it escalated to the point where his mother even was banned from the premises. Like, it just, he was treated in a way that a student should never be treated when they're literally just existing in a school setting. So that was what was happening at the time that I was preparing for my first presentation to council. And so I wrote about that because that was what was affecting me. It was affecting my community, what I was seeing happening. And that was, I guess, like one of the first entry points to what does it look like to use art for political engagement and political advocacy.
So beautiful, Timiro. So beautiful. So how exactly did a multi-talented, multifaceted poet like you cross paths with the Ribbon Rouge Foundation? What did you find similar with them and with your work so far?
I first crossed paths with Ribbon Rouge. I believe it was Ribbon Rouge that supported the Breath and Poetry Collective many years back, having those open mic spaces, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
So I believe that was when I first crossed paths, but officially, more recently, I came to know about Ribbon Rouge Foundation through Levo Disele, who is a great friend of the Ribbon Rouge Foundation and is also just a Black woman and an artist who creates space so often and brings artists together. And so through her, to me, Ribbon Rouge seemed like a space for community, for collaborating. But yeah, Levo was kind of my pathway to introduction to Ribbon Rouge.
Oh, beautiful. So what do you guys do at the Arts Collective? Because you put Dr. Label, you put yourself, my God, in the same what you guys creating.
The Artist Collective is a really exciting space because I think that one of the things, even though I've had access to like mentorship and support, one of the things that's also characterized my experience as a Black artist here has been isolation, this feeling of like trying to have upward mobility and coming across all of these barriers and gatekeepers and feeling like you're doing this on your own. And we're not doing it on our own because there are so many talented Black artists in our city. And so the Artist Collective is a space for all of us to be in one room together, working towards a common goal, speaking about the things that each of us are facing in our own silos and doing that in community with one another and just like affirming one another, supporting and uplifting one another, and hopefully creating more space and platforms for other Black artists to also access.
That's beautiful. And I think that's also necessary because being an artist, like you said, it can be isolating, is isolating. And yeah, because I walked in at the end of a meeting, was it last month? I was like, oh my goodness, everybody in the room was incredibly talented and everybody in the room was special. and they brought something else. They brought something unique to the table. So in terms of the work that Ribbon Rouge does to educate people around HIV, to enhance conversations around safety and not stigma, do you find that HIV perhaps is a problem within your own community? And do you find that those conversations are maybe difficult to have or not?
To be completely honest, I think that the first time I even was in a space where Black communities were having conversations about HIV was when I was in that room at the Artist Collective meeting, and we were learning about the work that Ribbon Rouge does. So I think what that to me means is that it's a taboo that we don't really talk about or discuss, not because we shouldn't or not because people are not facing it, but because it's just not spoken about. So I think that it's definitely work that needs to be done. It's work that I need to educate myself on. It's very important, but we don't discuss it or talk about it at all, really, in my community, at least in my experience.
And do you think those sort of conversations are important right now, or do you find that your community is monogamous? Because even I beg your pardon though, I think it's wrong when we think also that sex is the only way people can maybe get HIV in today's world. Your thoughts?
I completely agree with you. I think that it is something that's stigmatized and that we don't discuss, that we don't talk about because of the shame that shrouds it, and not because it shouldn't be something shameful. It should be something that is spoken about. And I'm sure that it's a story that a lot of people hold and maybe don't know how to discuss or talk about, or maybe I'm just not in those spaces and I don't know where people are talking about it.
It's a difficult one to talk about because it's hard to come out and say, okay, I'm HIV positive, I'm HIV dead. I imagine it would be a difficult conversation for anybody to have, because I think Black people, first and foremost, they deal with discrimination based around the color of their skin, and this is another layer. And if you happen to be female, that's another layer on top of different limitations or different doors that are closed. So I'm just wondering, you talk about many forms of oppressions that we live through. Let's just talk a little bit about the work that the collective will be doing. What do you anticipate that work will be? Do you see that the work will be breaking barriers through oppression, through the many forms of oppression that exist in Edmonton today?
Yeah, I mean, we're very early on in the work. We're just gathering and figuring out and building and envisioning and dreaming about what the work will look like. But I think the first step really is having access to a space that brings us all together, where we are guiding the conversation, where artists not only have a seat at the table, but we're being listened to, we're being heard, and we are like leading the charge. And I think the core goals are to platform Black artists and to also make art accessible to our communities, because it's such a valuable healing tool, tool for dialogue, tool for celebration, for education. And so just having, and I think that people don't necessarily want to access or witness art if they don't feel like they're being reflected, because we're already erased from so many other narratives. So why would you then go out of your way to access art and art spaces if you feel like you're not being heard or reflected? And so hopefully by coming together as the Artist Collective and creating platforms and spaces for Black art to be created and uplifted, other people from our community can also feel like they want to access and witness that art.
I hear what you're saying. And thank you also for your honesty there. I was just wondering, as a poet, do you find the next generation or the generation coming behind you looking up to you for inspiration, looking up to you for how to even get into your space, how to overcome their own challenges and limitations, and wanting to do what you do?
Yeah, I think one of the really big challenges that many artists face is less about this desire to create and share, but it's more about like, how do we then make this a sustainable, self-sustaining career that we can make a livelihood from, and we don't have conversations about that. Like, how do you as an artist write a grant or create an artist CV or navigate as a business? And I think that I'm also still figuring that out and trying to access the resources to learn about that. But if we could create spaces for young artists to have those kinds of conversations and to access mentorship, where there can be transparent conversations of what that looks like and capacity can be built, I think that would be really valuable.
So the arts collectives, are you already having preliminary conversations about money, about getting paid for your time and your work? So it's sustainable, actually. That's a real concern.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been a topic of conversation, just like this understanding that one of the things that came up in one of our earliest meetings is that we know that often Black artists are the least valued in a lot of our communities. And it's not because that people do not recognize the value of our art, but it's that they don't feel the need to then honor that time by providing an honorarium or paying for that service or contribution. And it's a problem that mainly artists in particular face. And so definitely in creating a space, one of the conversations was making sure that we are compensating people fairly for their time and reducing barriers to access for artists that want to create self-sustaining careers.
Please, can you share experiences where you felt your craft was honored? I know you mentioned the Amal's experience, but let's open it up a bit and let's talk about spaces in this city where they actually honored your craft.
I think that one space definitely is the Breaking Ground Art Collective. And that is a collective entirely of Black artists, women, and so one space in particular where I felt very like my art has been honored and supported as the Breaking Ground Art Collective. It's a space entirely of Black artists, of women and gender nonconforming folks. And we come together and have completely guided the process of creating that work, of determining how it will be shared, what the core components of it will be. And the story that we're focusing on is a story of Blackness on the prairies. And we work together to also apply for funding so that we can all be compensated for the time that we're putting into creating this work of art. And I think that really what it comes down to is autonomy in the stories that we are telling, and safety in the spaces when we gather. Because anytime that I come to a rehearsal or preparing for a performance, I come to a room full of people who look like me, who understand my story, and where I can show up completely as myself without feeling like I have to compromise or negotiate what parts of my identity can be in that space. So yeah, those are really the two primary things: autonomy and safety.
So tell us about your most recent collection. Would that be Incantations of Black Love?
Yeah, I released that very recently, a couple years back, and it's a multimedia collection. So it's a chapbook, a short film, and then also an EP, a spoken word EP, which is the first time that I've ever done that. And it was really exciting to blend music and poetry and think about what it means to outside of a performance space as a spoken word poet. That's my first way of sharing is in performance spaces. But when I leave that performance space, how can the art continue to live beyond me and be accessed by people and I'm still telling a story that is expansive and that people can connect to. And so it was a really exciting endeavor. And I worked as much as possible with Black artists as well, across mediums when I was creating that work. So that was really exciting as well.
How was that received? How did it do?
Sorry, say that again.
How was it received?
It was good. I think that the people who experienced it, both in a live performance space, who read it, who watched it, who listened, who engaged with it, the feedback was really positive, especially from people from my community who felt like it was a story that they could connect to. And I think where I am right now is in the phase of how does it continue to live on? Like, how do I keep sharing this? And because one of the things I think I have a tendency to do as an artist is this, like, feeling this pressure to always be producing. And sometimes it's okay to say, okay, I've created this work and I can give it space to breathe, and I can keep platforming it and honoring it also by like allowing it to be at the forefront of what I'm doing. And I don't always have to be producing. So I'm just trying to figure out, what does that look like for me right now?
All right. So what are you working on now?
I am mainly most of my energy, I guess creative energy is going towards breaking ground and working with that collective. But I've just been doing a lot of commissioned work. So working with a lot of different organizations or individuals who have asked me to write poetry around certain topics, which has been really interesting because I haven't done this many commissions at one time ever. So it's been interesting feeling like, okay, I'm trying to maintain my own creative voice, but I'm also trying to produce work that speaks to like what this client is asking of me.
All right.
So that's
All
been
right.
interesting.
Okay. So what was it like to share stage with Grammy Award winning artist Yasin Bey?
That was an amazing experience. Yeah, that was a phenomenal experience. It happened, it was really unexpected when it happened. And also it was kind of terrifying because it was like, okay, what am I going to bring to this 10-minute set that I'm doing to open this space that is good enough and that fills the space? So yeah, it was an amazing experience, feels surreal, and really came about because of community members, women specifically in my community who created that opportunity for me, who
Oh,
saw me and said, yeah, I want you to be in this space. So yeah.
that's cool. Congratulations. So we're nearly coming to the end of this, but I wanted to hear what are some of your struggles? Could you tell me more about the struggles you face? And I know you just talked about the commission work. You're
Mhm,
telling me that you're busy right now, which is good.
mhm.
Busy equals good, equals money to pay your rent, your mortgage, feed your family, and so on and so forth. But what are some of the struggles you encounter? What are the things that may be frustrating you right now about being a
Mhm.
full-time multidisciplinary artist?
That's a good question. I'm still like so new to it. I think this is like my fourth or fifth month doing it full time.
Really?
So yeah, the struggles are emerging as we as we move through it. Um, the hardest thing is just staying the course, like believing that this is um a valid way of making a livelihood. I think because I grew up in an immigrant household where there was like this that conversation we have about like what does Black excellence look like and how can we have stability, and just being raised valuing certain things and attaching my identity, my sense of self to certain things. I feel like becoming a full-time artist is a huge shift in how I see myself and how I understand my identity and how I understand how I bring value to the world around me. So honestly, the biggest struggle has just been um, believing that this is something that I'm capable of doing and that I should yeah continue to like create space for that and stay the course.
Mm.
The imposter syndrome. Yeah.
I hear you. And I also realize that it's a bit too soon to talk about legacy, but when you think in terms of 45, 50, 60 years down the line, what might you want your legacy to look like then?
That's a very good question. I think that the most valuable thing that I can bring to any space is encouraging someone else to tell their story as well.
Mhm.
So, like, yes, I believe in the value of the art that I create, and I want to continue to be able to do that. But more importantly, when I share that in the spaces that I'm in, the hope is that every time I do that, someone hears it and feels like they can also do it and that their story also needs to be heard. Um, yeah, that's what I would say is the biggest contribution I can make.
Mm. Now, hope is a scarce commodity, I think, and you have to have a certain mindset to find hope and to find faith every day. So where do you find inspiration? Where do you find your hope?
Other artists, mainly Black women who create art. Just whenever I can listen to something or watch something or read something and feel like completely completely feel like this was created with someone who looks like me in mind, and that I'm seen and that I'm heard, and that my story is not a singular one, that there are other people who share my experience. That feeling, carrying that with me and feeling like I also want someone else to feel this way when I create something. So just, yeah, consuming art, reading books by Black women, listening to music by Black women, um, and reminding myself why it is that I'm doing what I do.
Is the world ready for Black women artists or Black women who create art?
I don't know if it's ready, but we've been doing it for so long and we've been the blueprint for so long. So regardless, we will continue to do it.
So in terms of the art collectives at Ribbon Rouge Foundation, what would your mark be? Would you be moving towards poetry as your own stamp of contribution, or you be going to the disciplinary arts of music, dance, and so on?
Poetry, I think when it comes to art, will always be my home because it was always my first love. It is always anytime I explore other art forms, whether it's like photography, dance, theater, and I return to poetry, it feels like coming home. It is a comfortable space for me to be in. So yeah, definitely, I think that's where I will carve out space and contribute. But I'm also, I think, also gonna try and advocate for the emerging artists in other art forms who are trying to find spaces to learn and flourish that are safe, that are welcoming, because I'm also yearning and searching for that.
Timiro Mohammed, you're a Somali-Canadian spoken word artist and a multidisciplinary artist, inspired by generations of storytellers before you. And if anyone is looking to find you, they can go to @t.imiro on Instagram.
Exactly, yes.
Did I get that right?
You did, thank you.
IMIRO. You've been singularly amazing. I have no doubt you do even greater things. I mean, you're one to watch. You know, I'm so excited for what your tomorrow looks like. Thank you so very much for joining the premiere edition of Ribbon Rouge Foundation podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to continue to watch the episodes that are to come.